Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Rav Yedidya Sinclair, author of Renewing Shemitah, Rav Kook, and, oh, I forgot the title. Rav Yedidya, can you say it for me?
Renewing Shemitah, Rav Kook, on the meaning and practice of the sabbatical year.
There we go.
Coming out with Maggie Books this September.
And Ms. Amy Larkin, author of Environmental Debt, The Hidden Cost of the Global Economy. Is that right? The changing global economy. I had it written down, but I couldn't access it. In any case, we're here to talk over something that I've heard from a lot of people for a long time, and that is, I really do want to solve the climate crisis, but I don't want to ruin the economy to do it. So the question that I have to ask the two of you, and Amy, I'll ask you first, is what is the cost of not solving the climate crisis? What is the ongoing cost of just letting everything ride?
Well, here we are today, and the first rule of business is if there is no nature, there is no business. So let me ask you this. What is the cost of the floods in Europe today? What is the cost of the fires in the West Coast today? What is the cost of the people getting sick from the smoke from the fires today? What is the cost to the agricultural industry in the West Coast today? I'm just talking about parts of the world we all know and touch and are familiar with. What is the cost of the wine industry in the United States not being able to insure itself, or the southeast coast of Florida not being able to insure itself, or the collapse of I could go on and on and on and on, and I haven't gotten to immigration, I haven't gotten to health costs, and basically, if we do not address the climate crisis, we will have no business at all. Our economy will collapse. The real estate in Florida, the real estate in Phoenix, the real estate in California and Oregon and Seattle and British Columbia, and in the Iberian Peninsula and the agriculture in Israel are all being threatened actively today because of climate change. And we are only beginning the impacts of climate if we do not address it. All of these issues, which are already terrifying, will get actively worse. And one of the most terrifying things that has happened very recently is that the Gulf Stream, which is what basically maintains the temperature in North America and Europe, is in fact weakening. And we don't exactly know what this will do to the climate, but it will certainly make Europe massively colder. So that is some of the indication of what's happening to the economy already because we have not yet addressed climate. However, I think I'm going to share my screen just for a minute and show you how, here we go, how we are separating environmental and economic performance. And this is an old chart. It's from a few years ago. It's even more serious today. Our job is to connect economic and environmental performance so that you make money when you produce good environmental consequences, because then we will have long-term value. So basically, without overwhelming people, I just want to say that there is no separation between mind and body, And there is no separation between economic and environmental consequences. And anyone who thinks that you will be harming the economy by addressing climate change has got it backwards. The only way we will save the economy is by addressing environmental consequence while doing good business. That's my answer.
Thank you. Rav Yedidya, do you have thoughts on the matter?
Yes, I agree with Amy's very powerful points, and I would just add one more thing, which is that economists have made a distinction between probability and uncertainty. Probability is when you can calculate the likelihood of something happening, and uncertainty, and Keynes made this distinction, is when you just don't know. It's in principle impossible to calculate the the probability of something happening. And with climate change, we know that we're dealing with uncertainties. Now, we don't know what the probability is of massive methane relief from the tundra in Siberia, or collapse of the Amazon rainforest. And we don't know what will be the costs and consequences of those things happening, except that they're incalculably catastrophic. And so it's not, one can't answer the question, what would it cost? But I think one has to, because of that, one has to decide we cannot let this happen.
Thank you. The second question on the table is the flip side. What are the solutions? And Rav Yedidya, we'll start with you. What are the solutions that people have suggested? What are the likely solutions for solving the climate crisis, and what will they cost?
Well, to put it simply and to oversimplify somewhat, what we need to do to solve the climate crisis is to replace polluting fossil fuels with non-polluting, non-carbon emitting renewables. That's the core of the challenge of solving climate change. Now, it is more complicated. There's more to it when we talk about, that doesn't explain our foods, what we do with our food systems or with our transportation systems. But that is the largest part of the challenge that we face. Well, how's that going? And the answer is actually extraordinarily well, as it happens. So I'm sharing my screen now. I want to show you a few pictures. Can you see that?
It's a little small. Is there a way to expand it?
Maybe. Nah, can't figure out how to expand it. Sorry. So what we see here is what's happened to emissions in the United States in 4 major climate change causing areas. And what we see is that in power generation, which was the biggest, we've seen a steady decline over the last dozen years or so. In transportation, industry, and buildings, and food is included within transportation and industry, we've seen either steady state or an increase. Now, what's been going, why has power declined? 2 reasons, one good, one bad. The good reason is that the costs of solar and other renewables have radically fallen. The bad, not so good reason is fracking of gas, which when gas was less carbon emitting than coal. But it's the good reason is that technology change, improvement, innovation, the deployment of solar at scale has brought down the cost of solar radically. It just, incidentally, those of us who've been involved in the business of trying to change people's behavior as a way of changing climate change should be troubled by this. So I'm troubled by it. With environmentalists, and myself included, have been trying to get Americans and everybody to fly less, eat less meat, drive less, doesn't seem to have made a difference. I mean, here's the consumption by meat of Americans, it's just gone up and up. But what has made a difference, and what's got things starting to go in the right direction, not nearly enough, of course, but starting in the right direction, is technology improvement and massive price fall in the prices of solar. So what's been happening to the price of solar? This picture says it, it says it all. Over the last 10 years, the price of solar has fallen by more than 90%. More than 90% in 10 years. And the deployment of solar has increased more than sevenfold. And those two things are, of course, connected. Because when you deploy solar at a large scale, you get economies of scale, you get learning effects, and you're able to produce solar more quickly. With the result that now, in most places in the United States, solar is competitive with or cheaper than fossil fuels. And in the next few years, that'll be true of almost everywhere in the world. I read a report today that 5 years ago, not a single watt of solar was actually economically competitive and it could be produced competitively without subsidies. I'm not sure that's 100% true, but it's almost true. But today, most of the solar produced is competitive. What's more, these improvements in cost, technology, and efficiency have actually gone way ahead of what's been predicted, right? We're actually, where the prices are today is actually 15, 20 years ahead of even the most optimistic predictions which have been made in the last 5 or 10 years. This is another really important chart for how we're going to solve climate change. What's been happening to storage? Because the sun doesn't shine at night, right? So if you're going to deploy solar or other renewables at large scale, you need storage, you need batteries. The cost of storage has also come down by 90%, to the point that in the next 2 or 3 years, according to Bloomberg, battery-driven cars will now be competitive with gas-driven cars. And that's the beginning of your solution to the whole transportation piece of things. So what these pictures show is that from an economic point of view, from a market point of view, solar and renewables and storage are competitive, and the technology development and markets are well on the way to solving climate change. I don't want to say or imply that it's just technology and just markets, because these changes were made possible when we're accelerated by government initiatives. I think the Obama administration deserves credit for incentivizing the development of solar. But it's very interesting, this whole process went on throughout the whole of the Trump administration, where Trump was rummaging climate change and solar, and yet the market and technology were doing their thing and quietly solving the problem. While
Love you, Didi. You have about a minute left.
Was not a problem. What I would like to say, and I think this is borne out by all the facts and evidence, is that the market is solving this. The economics is working. And what's holding us back, and it is holding us back, are the entrenched political interests of those industries and sectors which are being left behind by the economic development, and they're desperately trying to hang on to the market position which has made them billions over the last decades. The lobbying and political power of the fossil fuel industries are not going down without a fight. And that's what's going to make the difference between whether we solve this in 2-3 decades time, whether the economics solves it in 2-3 decades time, when natural systems are collapsing already, or whether we solve it in the next 10 years when we have a chance of reversing some of the damage that has been done.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. The time is unfortunately flitting.
Okay.
Thank you. That is really, really powerful. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree with everything that Yedidya said.
Rav Yedidya, can you unshare your screen?
Yes, of course. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would add that there are other areas that actually are more intractable and more difficult to resolve than the renewable energy in a funny way. Because of the advances in technology and the markets, the renewable energy is almost the simplest piece of addressing climate change, and it's hard enough. I think that plastic and packaging plastic is, of all of the new fossil fuel infrastructure, 40% of it is earmarked for plastic. Plastic is between, depending on who you speak to, between 8 and 14% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. I think that for me, the solution is that pollution can no longer be free. Once we change the economic, the accounting, I call on accountants to the rescue, because if we redefine profit so that we include the external costs that are currently not included in most of what we buy, we will solve the problem. So I would say that solar will be even cheaper when all of the other technologies are paying for their pollution. So I would just add to that, I think that's a good solution. And I especially agree with what you said about governments. I think that, and the very strange thing is that I hate to give them credit, but the Chinese government is the government that really put the turbo rockets under the solar industry by supporting them, which originally really harmed the US solar manufacturing industry. But then when the US wanted to cut off the Chinese solar technology, the laborers, which are way more than fossil fuel workers now in the US, said, no, we are installing this and it's good work and good business. So I just go back to pollution can no longer be free. That will solve the problem.
Thank you. The last question I'll ask is actually, you know what? I'm going to skip my last question and go straight to you. Do you have any further comments you want to tell the audience about this? Each of you has about a minute left. Amy, let's start with you.
You know, I find it so unusual that I'm speaking to rabbis a lot lately. I am a Jew, but I have not been a religious Jew. But I feel very, very strongly that there is a spiritual choice to be made to work as a warrior on behalf of the climate and on behalf of nature and the future. We will not solve this problem if we do not insert our soul into the story. So to you rabbis and to you religious Jews, I say to you, please insert nature deeply into your spiritual teachings, because I think that will help as well. Thank you.
Amazing. Rav Yedidya.
Yeah. Well, I think what I like to say is that the creative power of innovation and technology with the right incentives by government and the right guidance from the people and our values and preferences can make this happen. And I live in Israel. I work in the Israeli high-tech and clean tech industries, and I'm amazed every day by just the creative problem-solving ability of this area. And it is always, living in Israel, there's almost always, a story of values and beliefs behind people who work in this area. It's almost never just about business. There's people really want to do something good for the world. And I think this can make the difference. But if we don't use these powers, which I think can have a transformative effect, then I think we will see a very authoritarian moves by governments about the world as people just panic and think, we have to control everything. We have to forbid all these things because people will just be desperate. And I think, aside from the cost in freedom, which will entail, I don't think it'll solve the problem as well as people, being creative and innovative, driven by their values and their ideals.
Thank you so much to both of you. At this point, the chat is open. Go ahead and write any questions you might have for Amy Larkin, author of Environmental Debt, The Hidden Costs of a Changing Global Economy. While people write, Amy, maybe I'll just ask you briefly, what is your 2-minute message to people who tell you that solving climate change will destroy the economy?
Thank you for unmuting me. Thank you. A 2-minute message on what will solve.
What do you say to people who tell you that solving the problem will destroy the economy?
Well, what I said before in my videotape, I think if you look at the cost of climate change today, before we're at a catastrophic level, although we're moving into the catastrophic level, and certainly we can see the tipping points in front of us every day when we read the news. I think the cost is, we will have collapse. There will be mass migrations, there will be no food, there will be no water, and that's already beginning. So I think if you think it's too much money to address that and try to prevent that, I think I don't know what to say more than that. Just then clearly you have different inputs. Then I honestly don't know what to say. I mean, there will be industries that will collapse, and they're going to have to collapse. There is about $25 trillion on the books of fossil fuel companies that have to be stranded, because if they are burned, we are guaranteed to have catastrophic climate change. So I'm not some rosy-eyed, glass-eyed warrior saying it's going to be easy. It's not easy. I'm not saying, oh, green jobs, then it's going to be great. It's going to be very hard. But we have dug a hole for ourselves, so now we have to dig out.
Great, thank you. I have a really important question here from, excuse me one second, let me just find that name again. Oh, hold on. From Mr. Leon Metzger. And he writes, a company delivers power to, he says, through coal-generated electricity, economic development by supplying energy to impoverished rural areas, and environmental damage by increasing carbon dioxide emissions causing global warming. I'm not sure I understand everything here, but here's the important piece. Do you sacrifice environmental development for the impoverished in order to solve the climate crisis?
I think it's a false dichotomy, because certainly there are, you can, instead of putting in solar electricity, you can put, instead of putting in coal electricity, you can put in solar. There are, a friend of mine runs something called Village Industrial Power. There are many, many, many options that are not coal. And I think building up infrastructure for new fossil fuel will guarantee that most of the people who are impoverished now will have no water, no food, and no shelter. and no livable habitat. So I don't think it's a, I guess I would just, I don't think it's a sacrifice. I think, yes, we are brothers keepers, and yes, we can supply electricity that is clean. And in fact, that will help with the clean water as well, and the clean air.
Thank you. That's all of my questions in the chat. So here's what I urge you to do. I'm going to ask Amy another question. And in the meantime, you have one of the nation's great experts in climate economics. You wanted to hear about climate economics. What would you like to know? What can she tell you? Amy, what questions should they be asking you? And what's one question that they should ask you? And what is the answer?
How do I make my money talk? What can I do that will spur a great change? And I think one of the huge things that has to happen is that people need to bring climate change into all, I mean all, of their political activities. So that means for your school board, for your every level of government, there are things that can be done. There are small cities that are buying community aggregated electricity that is clean, that allows wind and solar power to be developed because the market's already there. I think that the first place is to go where the policies will change, or, you know, you are part of good business that is clean. I think those are the two most important things.
Fantastic. And while you were talking, some people got on the board with some questions. What are your thoughts regarding the U.S. tax code? How does the tax code have to change in order to encourage an increase in green business?
The tax code is a sneaky little thing because it's like there are direct subsidies and indirect subsidies. And the indirect subsidies is where all the action is. So I don't know if people know what external costs are. I alluded to it in the little video package. If I pollute something, if I cause environmental damage from, let's say, chemicals from my from my farm, and it destroys the fishing industry down the road. I made the money from my farm, but the fishing industry is out of luck, which honestly is likely paid for by insurance and or the tax code and or the poor schnooks in the fishing industry. So the tax code, first of all, I'm not a tax expert, so, but I do know that the subsidy issue is more relevant to climate than the tax issue. So farmers are paid for industrial agriculture, which is horrible for the climate, horrible for water, horrible for the air, and they get subsidized, and the same for fossil fuel infrastructure. And so I think that I am less, honestly, I know less about the tax code than I do about the subsidy situation.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. And that question is, how can we influence Wall Street to make a difference?
Oh my God, it's the most, actually, that's really a very important question. I think obviously divesting of fossil fuels and or actively working with money managers to demand that they demand of the companies that they buy, that they actively work on climate. I do a lot of work with global business, and they all say the same thing. We do something great. We go to our quarterly calls with analysts. We tell them, we did this, which is cost us a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of attention, and it's going to be a foundation for better business for the next 2 decades. No interest from Wall Street. I think that's changing because there is so much interest in environmental, ESG, environmental, socially positive funds. So it's changing a little bit, but it can't change fast enough.
Thank you. We're running out of time. Thank you, Amy Larkin, author of Environmental Debt, The Hidden Cost of a Changing Global Economy. Thank you all for your questions and your engagement in the program as a whole. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram at YC Torah, and have a wonderful night. Kol Tuv, everybody. Thank you.